Salutations, fellow thinkers, drinkers, and Rush fans. Something a little different today. A conversation recently, and Rush came up as a subject. And after a bit of back and forth, the question which was posited to me was simply, so what you're saying, Yuri, is after 40 years and 19 studio albums, there is not one song you do not like. I demurred a little. Well, yes, that's a more or less accurate reflection. Which is, I cannot say for my other two favorite bands, namely Black Sabbath. They have a few. Rock and Roll Doctor does spring to mind, as does Breakout. A couple of the Dio era songs I think are vastly overrated. Deep Purple, the majority of the output of Mark 3 and Mark 4, I really have no time for. There's some really terrible stuff there. And then, of course, who can forget Hello One Tries? The egregious Slaves and Masters album, which from start to finish is about as awful as things can get. But this is not the case with Rush. Despite their longevity and their willingness to experiment musically, one may have assumed that this very same willingness to experiment may have resulted in more failures. Not how I see it. Now, I have to be honest, they set the bar really, really high, in my opinion, when it comes to songcraft and songwriting. But no way I am saying, or am I saying, that all of their songs are 10 out of 10. Gold standard compositions, no. But then again, I am only comparing them to their siblings, shall we say. I make no comparison to any third party, any other band, or anything of that nature. There is a sliding scale, which I think is perfectly normal. For example, The Larger Bowl is a fine song, but no way would I ever say it was as good as Free Will. Conversely, Chemistry, it's just another really fine song. But I would never in a million years even suggest of saying it was as good as The Garden. I think you get my point. But what I was being asked to identify here, or think about, is those that have fallen off the scale. We have the sliding scale of quality, but these are sort of under the bar, shall we say. The real turds. The ones you despise, the ones you would routinely skip while playing any particular album. But I couldn't really think of anything. Or could I? While continuing the conversation, I made a mental note of a few songs that I thought at least are worthy of consideration for this undoubted honor. So I made a mental note of these, and when I got home, well, probably the next day, it doesn't really matter, I decided to listen to them and see what, do they fit this criteria? Well, let's have a look, shall we? There was nothing from the first two albums that occurred to me. Even their debut is a bit raw in places. Shall we say, a touch unsophisticated, especially when one considers what was to come. But there's nothing on there that fits this criteria. Not at all. No. Nothing I don't like. Nothing I would point to and say is, oops. Really, guys? Moving on to Fly By Nights, again, I have to say the same. Really enjoy this album. Some may point to Rivendell, and yes, I know it is in some quarters seen as divisive. Don't see it that way. It's not my favorite song. It's not the first thing that occurs to me when the subject of Rush is brought up, but no. Okay, we're getting there slowly. A Farewell to Kings does provide us with our first candidate. I'm not going to say too much about this album, for in listening to it for this very purposes, I did realize I'd undergone something of a change of opinion on it, and I will revisit it in a separate video. But for purposes of this video, it is, I'm afraid, I think I'm going bald. Inspired by a Kiss song with whom they toured, around this time often and became friendly, I believe. I believe that, however, the Kiss song was called Going Blind. An ode to masturbation, no doubt. And unfortunately, this song, well, let's start with the lyrics, shall we? Yeah, okay. A lot of people over the years, I have heard said have accused Rush of being a little too serious, a little too po-faced. Never heard that myself, or felt that myself. They're intelligent, they're articulate, but I've never found them devoid of humor. But some humor lands, or some jokes land better than others. This was apparently inspired by Alex's incipient fear of follicle loss. And the lyrics are not great. I mean, yeah, it's student humor, and okay, they weren't that much older at the time when they wrote it. One forgives them for it. But the song itself, the riff, does sound very much like a Kiss riff of circa 1975. And you can say that for the song construction on a whole. It does stand out a bit amongst the perhaps overwrought but progressive grandeur of the rest of the album. Ambitious, but perhaps not fully realized. No, this does stand out, and not in a good way. And the comparison to Kiss is, in this example, not a compliment. One may like both Rush and Kiss, but I think they need to be kept separate. Musically, they don't mix. Well, that was that. That's the first contender I have to offer. Although I have to say, it's not terrible. I can do without it. Alex does play a very nice guitar solo, however. I'd forgotten that. Now, from 2112 through to and including Signals, there is not one song that even remotely could be considered for this particular premise. So the next one comes from Grace Under Pressure, an album I really like. I'll know the story. First time they decided to work with that Terry Brown, and the original producer they engaged, whose name I have forgotten. Oh no, Steve Lillywhite. It didn't escape me. Although he escaped them and left them in the lurch somewhat at the last minute. And Peter Henderson, who I think was their engineer or an engineer more than a producer, stepped in at the last minute. Probably had the technical skill, but maybe not the extra value they were looking for from a producer, from the more creative point of view. I don't know. Maybe I'm doing it an injustice. It had a very dry production to it, though. But an album I really like is full of very strong material, both lyrically and musically. Until you get to Red Lenses. I'll say I've never really liked this. Although I have to be honest, it's not that easy to pinpoint why. There is a good musical idea there somewhere. I think it's the execution that lets it down. What do I mean? Well, there's just something too relaxed about it. It's almost like a jazz lounge band. I don't know whether anybody else would hear that. Possibly not. But again, in amongst the rest of the album that was lyrically quite aggressive, I say, forthright. And the music backed that up. This just sounds a little out of place. Again, this is not a terrible song. It just never connected with me. And, having accepted the challenge, as it were, it's the best I can offer thus far. Now, anybody who's seen my other Rush videos will know how highly I rate and regard Power Windows, so there's absolutely nothing on there even remotely worthy of consideration. By the time we get to Hold Your Fire, however, that doesn't quite hold true. No surprises here that I'm putting Tai Shan up for consideration, is it? I mean, even the band have admitted to the folly of this. On the positive side, musically they do their best to evoke the sense and the spirit, the feeling of the lyrics. Unfortunately, the lyrics are much better read than they are having them sung to one. On the page, it's an effective, even evocative piece of prose, but as a song lyric, it just doesn't work, does it? It sounds trite, cliched, yeah. And musically, it's just too soft. A bit meaningless, a bit meandering. It doesn't go on that long, does it? But it's directionless. It's more of a mood than it is a song construction, I feel. And being on Hold Your Fire doesn't really do it any favors. This is an album where they were coming to the end of their cycle, their 4-album cycle, with what now has been known as the keyboard phase, the 80s. And I think there were certain definite signs on Hold Your Fire that this particular experiment had run its course. They had moved a little too far away from their core identity, which is a 3-piece rock band. This is quite a weak album in term. It's quite a soft album. It's one of the albums that rocks the least. And having perhaps, yes, amongst those other things on the album, having Taishan there. Yeah. I think it gave ammunition for those who decry this era of the band. Era of the band. And I have to say, I'm glad that after this, that they did not continue in this direction. I mean, obviously, we don't know what they would have produced, but I'm happy they went back to, or started at least going back to their roots. Often had a feeling that, on a more general level, that Hold Your Fire may be better regarded by us today if it had ended, or culminated, with Turn the Page. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. We then get Taishan, as I have just discussed, followed by High Water. This always struck me as a bit innocuous, I have to say. Although on the positive side, Alex plays exceedingly well, and he's much more prominent in the mix to the fore, in the mix than he was on the majority of this album, which is all to the good, I think. But it's a decent effort. It just lacks balls. It lacks oomph. And despite there's a punctuating riff that occurs occasionally, which does hint at better things, but the song's just a bit of a damp squib, and this potential that I think is there is just somehow not realized, and it's a weak end to the album, or a weak culmination of the album. And having it follow Taishan just doubles the effect, amplifies the point. And I think the whole album perhaps suffers as a result of that. Maybe symptomatic of the album to some. I don't think so. I think the album contains much better stuff than that. But there you have it. They started down there, the next phase of their career, where they were going back to their core 3-piece. And they produced the absolutely wonderful Presto. And again, seeing my previous videos, you will know, once again, how highly I regard and rate this. So absolutely nothing from Presto worth considering for this particular video. Can't quite say that when we get to its follow-up. Roller Bones is one of those albums I've always had a strange relationship with. There are some things on it I think are really good. Some things on it I think are fair to middling. And then there's Neurotica. And it's strange, actually, because this starts off really well and promising. It starts off as this could be one of the most interesting ideas on the album. Well, then they get to the chorus, which is really weak. I don't think lyrically it's that strong either, but it's far too poppy, the chorus. Which is a pity, because the rest of the song does at least hint at better things. A missed opportunity? Yes, I would have to say so. But it is jarring. It is. And I'm not that keen on it. Again, coincidentally, perhaps, as with Hold Your Fire, the two songs on this album I have a problem with are the last two. Which brings us nicely onto You Bet Your Life, of which I have very little to say. It's just a throwaway pop song. What were you thinking? It's jaunty. It's got it's upbeat to an extent, but really? Well, that ended their two-album run with Rupert Hine. I don't know why he didn't. Whether it was a mutual decision, lack of availability, I don't know. But by the time they came to record Counterparts, which was the follow-up to Roll the Bones, Peter Collins was back in the producer's chair. And I have to say, whatever one may or may not think of Counterpart, it certainly sounded better than the preceding two efforts. And one of the big gripes I have about the Rupert Hine records, Presto and Roll the Bones, is, both for different reasons, sound pretty awful. One of the I've talked about remixes and stuff and stuff like that in other videos, but one album I'd really like to hear remixed would be Presto. Beside the point. Now, I think Counterparts is a really strong album. Really strong. When I was conceiving this list, the first thing that occurred to me was Nobody's Hero. I thought it was lyrically, perhaps, could have been better, shall we say? But I re-listened to it, and I changed my mind somehow. Yes, I still don't think it's Neil's finest effort, but I think it's not as awful as I recall it. Not that it was awful, but I just didn't think it worked somehow. Little too obvious. He's normally subtler than that. So no, it was. So I'm not going to include Nobody's Hero. It may come as a surprise to some, but what I am including in this list is Stick It Out. And that despite a really, really good riff, a really strong riff. I don't think the song lives up to its riff. Not terrible, but again, it's a weak chorus. Verses aren't that strong either. And the title, okay, yes, not every joke can land, but when you hear Stick It Out, you do rather think of David Coverdale rather than Neil Peart. To me, it's the weakest song on the album, and it's a pity because I think musically it's got a lot to offer, but it just doesn't work as a song. They then took a couple of years off, recharge the batteries, as it were, get back to, make sure their families hadn't forgotten them. Taking a break is often a very necessary part of any process, especially perhaps a creative process. But two things can happen. You can either come back refreshed and brimming with new ideas, or you can come back and realize you're not fully match fit. You can spend all the time in the gym as you want, but it's not the same as being on the field. And I think that latter does apply to a few songs here on Test for Echo, which otherwise I really like. However, the first contender that Test for Echo provides us, and I offer it for your consideration, is Time and Motion, which again, as I've said before, starts very promisingly. It's heavy, it has a hint of menace. Wow, this is going to be good. But again, it's another one. It fails to do justice even to its riff. And you know what really kills this for me? It's the vocal melody. On the verses, especially. Chorus isn't that hot either. It's far too angular, if I can put it that way. It's too abrupt, too start-stop. It's got no natural flow to this vocal melody. And surely that's the point of a vocal melody, is to give the listener something to attach their ears to, shall we say. Something inviting. Makes them want to listen more. Then you start, listening to the instrumentation. And, if you're a Rush fan, you start watching out for the chord changes or whatever it is, or listening to the amazing drumming. But there's that, it's a really weak vocal melody on this, which again is unfortunate because I think there's a lot of potential in the backing track. The next one, and this is going to be the best represented album. But the next one I offer for your consideration is Dog Ears. Now, for me, this is a rare lyrical fail. Doesn't work. There's nothing wrong with not always writing about serious or thought-provoking topics, themes. But if you're going to be light-hearted, make it funny, make it work. This doesn't. I never liked the lyrics to this. Though the track itself is another pretty strong effort, I have to say. It's got a drive to it, at least in the verses. The chorus on this occasion is well crafted, I think, but it's a bit soft. I'm really starting to feel that, having built up to it, that there's not a soft chorus was required. They needed to give it a bit more oomph, or perhaps even if they'd put in a nice, hard, aggressive middle eight or something. Vocals better. As I said, the vocal melody is better on this one. But the thing is, this is Rush, isn't it? And the lyrics are just so inextricably linked to the song. You cannot separate them. And yeah, this has always jarred. Pity. And the last contender, provided by Test for Echo, is Virtuality. And again, I'm going to make similar observations. The musical foundation, again, is very, very promising and actually quite impressive. But again, I have to say the vocal melody on this does it no favors whatsoever. It's not particularly tuneful, if I can put it that way. Yeah, the chorus has a certain catchiness to it. I still think it's a little weak. And again, lyrically, this is not Neil's strongest effort. I know this was, in the fashion of the time, the early days of the internet. And speculating, perhaps, the effect it was going to have on society. But no, really, no, not his strongest effort even. And again, the chorus, catchy as it is, I think is slightly weak. They then had their enforced break, and they returned with Vapor Trails, which I know is a polarizing album. But I have to be honest, there's nothing on there that I find fits the bill for this particular video. Nothing at all. Which brings us on to Snakes and Arrows. There's a couple of songs on here that, if I go back to what I said in the beginning, on the sliding scale, there are a couple of songs that I think are lower down the scale, sort of Bravest Faced and Good News First. They're good, but they're hardly sensational. But the one that jars with me, and it always has, since the first time I heard it, and when I listened to it this morning, it doesn't matter, does it? I haven't changed my opinion, and that is Spindrift. And my complaints are very similar to my complaints, or my observations, I had with Time and Motion from Test for Echo. It has real menace to it instrumentally. It's got a doomy, really heavy feel to it. I mean, not quite Black Sabbath, but for Rush, this is, and when it starts, yes, you are engaged musically. But the vocal melody here is very weak and very ineffectual, unengaging, uninspired, and uninspiring. Sorry, it's not one of Geddy's finest efforts. It does somehow cause the song to meander along, where it should be, the vocal melody should be helping to drive it along. But I still think if I could listen to it sans the vocal track, this would be an engaging piece of music, but you can't. The song is, is the whole. It's not just the composite parts, is it? And this doesn't work for me, and it's one that really stands out on this album in a bad way. All right, the last album, Clockwork Angels, I think is absolutely fantastic, and there is not a thing on there that comes anywhere close to consideration for this. Well, you have it. Not many, I would have to say. And to be honest with you, not many. I mean, these are the ones I was I have issues with, shall we say. But perhaps only Tai Shan really fits the category of I really dislike it and would skip it. I used to skip High Water by default because it was the one that followed and nothing followed it. So it just became practical to stop listening to Hold Your Fire after, I should say, turn the page. Much the same with Roll the Bones. Didn't need to listen to Neurotica or You Bet Your Life. You could stop the album with, I think, Heresy was the one that preceded it. But still, I don't think that's bad going. They did set the bar very, very high in terms of songwriting and musicianship. Again, this is all totally subjective. But please let me know what you think. Have I missed anything, do you think? Have I maligned anything? Feel free to let me know. Please do comment, and obviously like, subscribe, share, and all those good things. And again, I thank you for your indulgence. I wish you well, and Maçhonquèrre.